The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I could tell from the embossed letterhead that this was going to ruin my entire week. I stood in the doorway of my grandfather's cabin in Pine Ridge, Montana, holding what appeared to be an eviction notice from someone named Patricia Thornton, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. The letter was 3 pages long, typed in an aggressive font that seemed to scream at me through the paper. According to Patricia, I was in violation of approximately 17 different HOA bylaws. My cabin was an eyesore that diminished property values, and I had exactly 30 days to vacate the premises or face legal action. The thing was, I had never even heard of the Whispering Pines HOA. My name is Derek Feldman, and I inherited this cabin from my grandfather 6 months ago when he passed away at the ripe old age of 92. The property had been in our family since 1947, long before anyone thought to build the fancy vacation homes that now surrounded my modest log cabin. Grandpa Henry had bought these 20 acres of Montana wilderness with money he saved from working in the copper mines, and he had built this cabin with his own 2 hands over the course of 3 summers. I moved here from Seattle after my divorce, needing a fresh start and a place to clear my head. The cabin was perfect, rustic, quiet, and mine. Or at least, I thought it was mine. I read through the letter again, my coffee growing cold in my other hand. The violations ranged from ridiculous to completely fabricated. Apparently, my cabin's exterior paint color was not from the approved palette, even though the logs were their natural cedar color and had never been painted. My mailbox was the wrong style. My truck was parked in a manner that violated setback requirements, even though it sat in my own driveway, a good 100 feet from the road. The list went on and on. The letter concluded with a demand that I appear at an HOA meeting the following Thursday at 7 in the evening to discuss my numerous violations and unauthorized occupancy. I crumpled the letter and tossed it on the kitchen table. This had to be some kind of mistake. I grabbed my laptop and started searching for information about the Whispering Pines HOA. What I found made my blood pressure rise. The HOA had been established 5 years ago when a developer bought up several parcels of land around the lake and built luxury vacation homes. The community had expanded rapidly, with wealthy families from California and Texas buying up properties as summer retreats. The HOA managed a fancy clubhouse with a pool, tennis courts, and a marina. Monthly fees were steep, running about $800 per household. I had never paid a cent to this organization, and I had no intention of starting. The next morning, I drove into town to visit the county recorder's office. If this Patricia Thornton wanted to claim I did not belong here, I needed to have my documentation in order. The clerk, a friendly woman in her 50s named Margaret, helped me pull up the property records. "The Feldman property," she said, typing into her computer. "Oh yes, this is one of the old ones. Deed recorded in 1947, transferred to you 6 months ago upon the death of Henry Feldman. No liens, no encumbrances, and definitely no HOA covenant attached. Can you print that out for me?" I asked. "Of course." She clicked a few more keys. "You know, you are the 3rd person this month asking about HOA issues with pre-existing properties. That Whispering Pines group has been getting aggressive." "What do you mean?" Margaret glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, even though we were alone in the office. "They have been trying to force old properties into their association. They claim it increases property values and maintains standards, but really, they just want everyone paying those monthly fees. More money for their fancy clubhouse. Can they legally do that? Not without your agreement. If your property predates the HOA and you never signed their covenant, They have no jurisdiction over you. She handed me a stack of papers. Here is everything you need. Your original deed, the transfer documents, and a certificate showing no HOA encumbrances. I thanked Margaret and left with my ammunition. If Patricia Thornton wanted a fight, she was going to get one. Thursday evening came quickly. I drove to the Clubhouse, which was an impressive timber frame building overlooking the lake. The parking lot was full of expensive SUVs and luxury sedans. I pulled in with my beat-up Ford F-150, enjoying how out of place it looked among the Range Rovers and Teslas. Inside, the clubhouse was even more luxurious. Vaulted ceilings, a massive stone fireplace, leather furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the lake view. About 30 people sat in folding chairs arranged in rows, facing a table at the front where 3 people sat. The woman in the center had to be Patricia Thornton. She was exactly what I expected. Probably in her late 40s, with expertly highlighted blonde hair styled in that specific way that screamed expensive salon. She wore designer athleisure wear, the kind that costs more than most people's car payments. Large sunglasses perched on top of her head despite being indoors at 7 in the evening. She was currently speaking to an elderly couple in the front row, her voice sugary sweet but with an edge of condescension. I took a seat in the back row. A few people glanced at me, clearly not recognizing me as one of their own. I was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, which put me decidedly underdressed for this crowd. Patricia wrapped up her conversation with the elderly couple and called the meeting to order. She went through standard HOA business, approving the minutes from last month, discussing the pool maintenance schedule, debating the merits of different landscaping companies. It was all painfully boring. Then she reached what was clearly the main event of her evening. And now we need to address a serious matter concerning property standards and unauthorized occupancy. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. Mr. Feldman, I see you have decided to join us. Please come to the front. I stood and walked down the aisle, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on me. I stopped in front of the table but did not sit. Mr. Feldman, you received our notice of violation, correct? Patricia's voice had lost its sweet tone. I received a letter, yes. And yet you have made no effort to remedy any of the 17 violations we documented. That's because I do not recognize your authority to cite me for violations. A murmur went through the crowd. Patricia's perfectly made-up face tightened. Excuse me. I pulled the documents from my jacket pocket. My property predates your HOA by almost 60 years. I never signed your covenant. You have no jurisdiction over my land. That is absurd, Patricia said, her voice rising. Every property in Whispering Pines falls under HOA governance. It is in our bylaws. Your bylaws do not override property law. I have the deed right here, along with a certificate from the county recorder stating there are no HOA encumbrances on my property. One of the other board members, a balding man in an expensive polo shirt, leaned forward. Mr. Feldman, you do not seem to understand. When you inherited the property, you inherited the obligations that come with it. The only thing I inherited was free and clear title to 20 acres of land that my grandfather bought in 1947. Your association did not exist when he bought it. It did not exist when he built his cabin, and he never agreed to join it when you formed 5 years ago. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Your cabin is a blight on this community. It brings down everyone's property values. The structure is old and deteriorating. You have vehicles parked haphazardly. Your property looks like a junkyard compared to the standards we maintain here. My property looks like a traditional Montana cabin because that is what it is. And what it looks like is none of your business because I am not part of your association." "We will see about that," Patricia hissed. "I have already consulted with our attorney. We have legal options to enforce compliance. Then I guess I will see you in court." I turned and walked out of the clubhouse, leaving a room full of shocked, wealthy homeowners behind me. The next day, I called a lawyer. I found a firm in Missoula that specialized in property law, and after explaining my situation, I was connected with an attorney named Robert Chen. We met at his office on Monday morning. Robert was younger than I expected, probably in his mid-30s, but Margaret at the recorder's office had recommended him as the best property lawyer in western Montana. He listened to my story while taking notes on a legal pad. "You have the letter they sent you?" he asked. I handed it over. He read through it, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. "This is aggressive," he said, "and completely without legal basis based on what you have told me." "That is what I thought. Let me do some research. I want to pull all the HOA documents, their bylaws, and their articles of incorporation. I also want to look at the covenants on every property in their association." He paused. "There is something else you should know. I have been dealing with this particular HOA before." "Really?" "They tried something similar with a widow who owned a small ranch on the north side of the lake, Mrs. Henderson. Her husband bought the property in the 1960s. The HOA claimed she needed to pay 5 years of back fees and fines. We threatened to sue and they backed off. So they have done this before. It is a pattern. They target properties that predate the HOA, probably hoping people do not know their rights or cannot afford to fight back." Robert tapped his pen on the desk. "What I do not understand is why they are so aggressive about it. HOA fees are significant, sure, but going after a few old properties seems like more trouble than it is worth." The woman at the county recorder said something about wanting everyone under their control. "Probably. Some HOA boards are power-hungry. Patricia Thornton strikes me as that type." He made another note. "Let me dig into this. I will call you in a few days." I left Robert's office feeling better about the situation. At least I had professional help. 2 weeks later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was even more threatening than the first. It claimed I owed $17,000 in fines for my violations and continued non-compliance. If I did not pay within 10 days, they would place a lien on my property. I immediately forwarded it to Robert, who called me within an hour. "They cannot do that," he said, his voice tight with anger. "They have no authority to fine you or place a lien. This is harassment, plain and simple." "What do? I file a lawsuit." "We sue them for harassment, and we ask for a declaratory judgment confirming that your property is not subject to their HOA." He paused. "There is something else. I finished my research into the HOA's formation documents. Derek, I need you to come to my office. There is something you need to see." An hour later, I was sitting across from Robert again. He had spread out a series of documents across his desk, including maps and property surveys. When the developer created the Whispering Pines HOA, they filed documents establishing the common areas that would be owned collectively by the association, Robert began. "The clubhouse, the pool, the tennis courts, the marina. These are all considered common elements owned by the HOA members proportionally. Okay. The clubhouse sits on a 2-acre parcel. According to the HOA's declaration, this parcel was donated by the developer to establish the common areas." He slid a map toward me. "But when I pulled the actual property records, something does not add up." I looked at the map. The clubhouse was marked clearly, sitting on a rectangular parcel near the lake. "The developer claimed to donate land he owned," Robert continued. "But the legal description in the HOA documents does not match the legal description of what the developer actually owned. What does that mean? Robert pulled out another document, this one older and yellowed with age. This is the original survey of your grandfather's property from 1947. 20 acres with specific boundary markers. He traced his finger along the property lines. Now look at where the clubhouse sits. I followed his finger. The clubhouse was clearly within the boundaries of my grandfather's original property. Wait, are you saying the clubhouse is on my land? Not just the clubhouse. The pool, the tennis courts, and half of the parking lot. Robert sat back in his chair. When the developer created the HOA, they did not have clear title to this 2-acre parcel. They either made a mistake or deliberately hoped no one would notice. Your grandfather's property line extends farther east than the developer realized. The county records are clear. I stared at the maps, my mind racing. So I own the land their clubhouse sits on. You do. And that means the HOA has been trespassing on your property for 5 years. A slow smile spread across my face. Patricia Thornton is trying to evict me from my cabin while her precious clubhouse sits on my land. That is exactly what it means. Robert was smiling too. This changes everything. We are not just defending against their harassment, we have leverage. Significant leverage. What do? First, I file a quiet title action to confirm your ownership of the entire 20 acres, including the parcel the clubhouse occupies. Second, I file suit against the HOA for trespassing and harassment. Third, we send Patricia Thornton a very pointed letter explaining the situation. I like the sound of that. Robert drafted the letter that afternoon. It was a masterpiece of legal writing, polite but devastating. It explained that my property was not subject to HOA governance, that I owed no fines or fees, and that any attempt to place a lien on my property would be met with immediate legal action. Then came the kicker. The letter informed the HOA that their clubhouse, pool, and tennis courts sat on my property without permission, making them liable for 5 years of trespassing. The letter concluded with an offer. If the HOA immediately ceased all harassment against me and publicly acknowledged that my property was not subject to their governance, I would grant them an easement allowing the clubhouse to remain. If they continued their aggressive behavior, I would exercise my full property rights, which could include demanding removal of the structures. Robert sent the letter via certified mail and email. Then we waited. The response came faster than expected. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. I answered groggily. "Mr. Feldman, this is Patricia Thornton. We need to talk immediately." "Good morning, Patricia. It is pretty early." "Do not play games with me. That letter from your lawyer is full of lies and threats. Our clubhouse does not sit on your property. That is ridiculous." "Actually, it does. My attorney has the surveys and county records to prove it. This is extortion. You are trying to shake down the HOA for money." "No, I am trying to live peacefully in my cabin. You are the one who sent me threatening letters and fake fines. All I want is for you to leave me alone. That clubhouse cost $2 million to build. You cannot just claim you own the land under it." "I am not claiming anything. I am stating a fact based on recorded property deeds. My grandfather owned this land decades before your clubhouse existed." Patricia's voice became shrill. "We will fight this. Our lawyer says you do not have a case." "Then I guess we will see each other in court. Have a good day, Patricia." I hung up. My phone immediately rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Patricia called 4 more times in the next hour, leaving increasingly frantic messages. I forwarded them all to Robert. 2 days later, the HOA filed a lawsuit against me, claiming that my property was subject to their governance and that I owed fines and fees totaling $23,000. They also sought a declaration that they owned the land under the clubhouse. Robert filed our countersuit the same day. We sued for harassment, trespassing, and sought a declaratory judgment confirming my property boundaries and lack of HOA obligation. We also filed for a restraining order preventing the HOA from contacting me directly. The local newspaper got wind of the dispute and ran a story about it. The headline read, "HOA Battle Brews Over Historic Cabin and Clubhouse." The article painted Patricia and the HOA board in an unflattering light, describing them as newcomers trying to push around a family with deep Montana roots. The story mentioned that my grandfather had been a decorated World War II veteran and a beloved member of the community for 60 years. The publicity did not help Patricia's mood. According to Robert, who was now dealing with the HOA's attorney, she was adamant that we were trying to steal their clubhouse. She could not or would not accept the possibility that they had built on land they did not own. The case moved forward quickly by legal standards, though it still took months. We went through discovery, where both sides exchanged documents. The HOA's position became increasingly untenable as the evidence mounted. Their own surveyor, when confronted with the original 1947 property description, admitted that the clubhouse appeared to encroach on my land. The developer who had created the HOA had apparently relied on a faulty survey when establishing the boundaries. Whether this was an honest mistake or a deliberate attempt to grab land was unclear, but the result was the same. The clubhouse sat on property that belonged to me. In the meantime, Patricia ramped up her campaign against me. She organized a petition among HOA members demanding I drop my lawsuit. She gave interviews to the local newspaper claiming I was trying to destroy the community. She even showed up at my cabin one Saturday morning with a cameraman, attempting to film the violations for evidence. I was working on replacing some boards on my front porch when her white Mercedes SUV pulled into my driveway. She got out wearing designer jeans and carrying her phone like a weapon, filming everything. "Mr. Feldman, can you explain why you are trying to steal property from hardworking families?" She called out. I looked up from my work. "Patricia, you are trespassing. Please leave my property." The public has a right to know what kind of person tries to extort an entire community. I am not extorting anyone. I am defending my property rights. The same property rights you tried to violate when you sent me fake fines. Those fines were legitimate. Your property is a disgrace. I stood up, hammer still in my hand. My property is my business. You do not get to decide what my home looks like. Now please leave before I call the sheriff. "Are you threatening me?" She zoomed her phone camera in on my face. "I am asking you to leave my private property. That is not a threat. That is a legal request." She stood there for another moment, clearly hoping I would say something she could use against me. When I just went back to work on the porch, she finally got back in her Mercedes and left, tires spitting gravel. That evening, she posted the video to the community Facebook group with a caption about me being hostile and threatening. Several people commented in support of her, but others pushed back, pointing out that she had gone to my property uninvited and refused to leave when asked. The thread devolved into a heated argument about property rights, HOA authority, and whether the clubhouse situation was really my fault. The case finally went to court in September, almost 7 months after I received that first threatening letter. The hearing was held in the district courthouse in Kalispell. Judge Morrison presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for cutting through nonsense. Robert and I sat at one table. The HOA's attorney, a slick guy named Brandon Mitchell from a big firm in Billings, sat at the other with Patricia and 2 other board members. The hearing took most of the day. Brandon argued that the HOA had authority over all properties in the Whispering Pines area, regardless of when they were purchased. He claimed that my property, by virtue of being surrounded by HOA properties, was subject to their governance under Montana law. He also argued that the Clubhouse land dispute was a separate matter that should be handled in a different proceeding. Judge Morrison did not seem impressed. "Counselor, how can an HOA formed in 2019 have jurisdiction over a property purchased in 1947 when the owner never signed a covenant?" "Your Honor, the HOA's declaration establishes governance over the entire Whispering Pines area based on the legal descriptions filed with the county. But Mr. Feldman's property was never included in those legal descriptions, was it?" Brandon hesitated. "The intent was to include all properties in the area. Intent is not the same as legal authority. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Feldman or his grandfather ever agreed to join this HOA?" "No, Your Honor, but then I fail to see how you can claim jurisdiction." She turned to Robert. "Counsel, please present your evidence regarding the property boundaries." Robert walked the judge through the surveys and county records. He showed the 1947 deed and property description for my grandfather's land. Then he overlaid it with the current maps showing the clubhouse location. The encroachment was clear and undeniable. Patricia looked like she might be sick. Her face had gone pale, and she kept whispering urgently to Brandon, who was trying to concentrate on the hearing. Brandon attempted to argue that the HOA had gained rights to the land through adverse possession, claiming they had openly used it for 5 years. Robert countered that adverse possession required 20 years in Montana, and besides, I had only inherited the property 6 months ago, so the clock had reset. Judge Morrison asked several pointed questions about the developer's survey and how the mistake had occurred. Brandon did not have good answers. It became increasingly obvious that the HOA had built their clubhouse on land they did not own, and then tried to bully me into submission when I would not play along. Finally, Judge Morrison called for a lunch break. When we reconvened an hour later, she delivered her ruling. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented today," she began. "The facts are clear. Mr. Feldman owns a 20-acre parcel that was legally purchased by his grandfather in 1947 and transferred to him 6 months ago upon his grandfather's death. This property has never been subject to any HOA covenant or agreement. The Whispering Pines HOA has no jurisdiction over Mr. Feldman's property and had no authority to issue fines or violations." Patricia made a small noise that might have been a whimper. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, "the evidence clearly shows that the clubhouse, pool, tennis courts, and a portion of the parking lot constructed by the HOA sit on land owned by Mr. Feldman. The HOA has been trespassing on his property since these structures were built." Brandon stood up. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not, Counselor. I am not finished." She gave him a stern look. "What troubles me most about this case is the HOA's behavior toward Mr. Feldman. Rather than verify their legal position, they sent threatening letters, issued baseless fines, and attempted to force him off his own property. This is exactly the kind of HOA overreach that gives these organizations a bad reputation." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Judge Morrison was not pulling any punches. "Therefore, I rule in favor of Mr. Feldman on all counts. The HOA must immediately cease all attempts to enforce any rules or fines against him. They must publicly acknowledge that his property is not subject to their governance. Additionally, the HOA is guilty of trespassing on Mr. Feldman's property." She paused and looked directly at Patricia. "Miss Thornton, I am ordering the HOA to negotiate in good faith with Mr. Feldman regarding the structures on his land. He has generously offered to grant an easement allowing the clubhouse to remain. I suggest you accept that offer, because the alternative would be far more costly for your organization. Patricia was crying now, actual tears running down her face, smearing her mascara. She looked like her entire world was collapsing. Judge Morrison was not done. I am also awarding Mr. Feldman attorney's fees and costs to be paid by the HOA. The amount will be determined at a subsequent hearing. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Feldman $15,000 in damages for harassment and emotional distress. Brandon tried once more. Your Honor, the HOA's position was based on a good faith. Your client sent Mr. Feldman letters demanding $23,000 in fines they had no legal right to impose. They threatened to place liens on his property. They showed up at his home uninvited to film him. None of that reflects good faith, counselor. She banged her gavel. This court is adjourned. Patricia was sobbing openly now. The other board members looked shell-shocked. As they gathered their papers, I heard Patricia wailing to Brandon about how this could not be happening, that they had spent $2 million on the clubhouse, that this would bankrupt the HOA. Robert and I walked out of the courtroom together. Outside, he shook my hand. That went even better than I hoped, he said. Morrison does not like HOA bullies. What happens now? They will have to come to us about the easement. They have no choice. Without it, you could legally demand they remove the clubhouse, which would cost them millions. I do not want to be unreasonable. I just wanted them to leave me alone. I know, but you have all the leverage now. We can dictate terms. Over the next week, Brandon called Robert several times to discuss the easement. Patricia had apparently been removed as the lead negotiator after she had a meltdown during a board meeting, screaming about how this was all my fault and threatening to sue me personally. The other board members had wisely decided she was a liability. The new HOA president, a retired accountant named George, was much more reasonable. Through our lawyers, we negotiated an easement agreement. The HOA would pay me $10,000 annually for the right to keep their clubhouse on my land. The agreement was for 20 years, with an option to renew. They also had to put up a plaque acknowledging that the clubhouse sat on the historic Feldman property. Additionally, the HOA had to publish a formal letter in the community newsletter and the local newspaper acknowledging that my property was not subject to their governance and apologizing for their treatment of me. The attorney's fees came out to $47,000, which the HOA had to pay. Combined with the $15,000 in damages and the money from the easement, I actually came out well ahead financially. More importantly, I had established my rights and put an end to Patricia's harassment. Patricia herself resigned from the HOA board 2 weeks after the court ruling. According to local gossip, she was humiliated by the loss and angry at the other board members for not supporting her more aggressively. She put her vacation home up for sale, and I heard she moved back to California. The community newsletter published the required apology in October. It was carefully worded by lawyers, but the message was clear. The HOA had been wrong, and I had been right. Several neighbors stopped by my cabin to apologize for believing Patricia's version of events. A few admitted they had always thought the HOA was too aggressive, but had been afraid to speak up. One of those neighbors was the elderly couple I had seen at that first HOA meeting, the Hendersons. Mrs. Henderson brought me a pie and apologized for not standing up for me. Patricia told us you were trying to cheat the HOA, she explained. She said you were making up lies about property lines. I should have known better. Your grandfather was a good man. You knew my grandfather. Oh yes, Henry and my late husband used to go fishing together. He helped us when our well went dry back in the 80s, lent us water until we could get a new well drilled. She smiled sadly. He would be proud of you for standing up to those bullies. That meant more to me than the money or the legal victory. The plaque went up at the clubhouse in November. It read, "The Whispering Pines Clubhouse sits on the historic Feldman property, continuously owned by the Feldman family since 1947. We are grateful for the easement granted by Derek Feldman, allowing this community space to exist." I drove by to see it one cold morning. The clubhouse looked the same as always, but now everyone who entered would know the truth. The HOA did not own everything. They could not bully people into submission, and property rights meant something. I spent Thanksgiving at the cabin, which I had come to think of as truly mine rather than just my grandfather's. I had fixed up the porch, repaired some of the roof, and added a new wood stove. The place was comfortable and felt like home. On Thanksgiving morning, I took my coffee out onto the porch and looked at the lake. The water was gray and choppy under the November sky. Most of the vacation homes were empty now, their owners back in California and Texas until summer. My phone rang. It was Robert. "Happy Thanksgiving," he said. "I have some news you might find interesting." "What's that?" "The county attorney's office just filed charges against Patricia Thornton." I sat up straight. For what? Fraud and theft. Apparently, she had been embezzling money from the HOA. When they did a full audit after the lawsuit, they found she had been writing herself checks for fake expenses. We're talking about $70,000 over 3 years. Wow. Gets better. Some of that money was supposed to go to property surveys and legal research when they were establishing the HOA boundaries. If she had actually paid for proper surveys, they would have discovered the clubhouse problem before they built it. So her theft led to the whole mess. Exactly. The current board is cooperating with the investigation. She will probably face criminal charges and have to pay restitution. After we hung up, I thought about Patricia and her desperation to control everything. She had tried so hard to create her perfect community with her perfect rules, but she had been stealing from the people she claimed to represent. And when someone did not fit her vision, she had tried to destroy them. The irony was that if she had just left me alone, none of this would have happened. I would have lived quietly in my cabin, the HOA would have continued operating their clubhouse, and Patricia would have kept embezzling money without anyone noticing. Her own aggression had caused her downfall. December brought snow to the mountains. I settled into a routine of working remotely for my software company, chopping wood for the stove, and enjoying the peace of the Montana winter. Occasionally, I saw other year-round residents around town, and most were friendly. The few HOA members I encountered were polite, almost apologetic. George, the new HOA president, stopped by one afternoon with a bottle of whiskey as a peace offering. "I want you to know the board had no idea about Patricia's embezzlement," he said as we sat by my wood stove. "We trusted her to handle the finances." "I believe you. She was always so confident, so sure of herself. We thought she knew what she was doing." He shook his head. "I should have asked more questions when she started targeting your property. It seemed excessive even for HOA enforcement." "Why did you go along with it?" George sighed. "Property values mostly. She convinced us that having a rustic cabin among all the luxury homes would hurt resale values. She made it sound like you were the problem." He looked embarrassed. "I am retired military. I should have recognized a bullying campaign when I saw one. You are trying to make it right now. That counts for something." We talked for a while about his time in the Air Force and my grandfather's service in World War II. By the time George left, I felt like I might have found a friend in the community. In January, the local newspaper ran a follow-up story. The headline read, "Former HOA President Arrested on Fraud Charges." The article detailed Patricia's embezzlement and connected it to the failed attempt to force me out of my property. The story painted a picture of an out-of-control HOA president who had spent years intimidating homeowners and stealing money. Several other people came forward with stories of Patricia's bullying. One couple said she had fined them $5,000 for painting their front door the wrong shade of blue. Another family said she had tried to ban their teenage son from using the pool because he played his music too loud. The HOA had become Patricia's personal fiefdom, and no one had challenged her until I came along. The criminal case moved forward. Patricia hired an expensive lawyer from Denver, but the evidence was overwhelming. The HOA's bank records showed dozens of checks made out to fake vendors, all of which had been deposited into Patricia's personal account. She had created invoices for landscaping, maintenance, and legal services that had never been performed. In March, she accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to felony theft and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with 2 years suspended. She would serve 1 year in the Montana Women's Prison in Billings, followed by 5 years of probation. She also had to pay back the $70,000 she had stolen, plus penalties and interest. I did not attend her sentencing hearing, but Robert sent me the details. According to him, Patricia had cried and apologized, claiming she had been under financial pressure and made terrible mistakes. The judge had not been sympathetic, noting that she had stolen from her neighbors while living in a $500,000 vacation home and driving a luxury car. Spring came to Montana with the usual mud and melting snow. My cabin held up well through the winter, and I spent weekends working on improvements. I built a new deck overlooking the lake and planted a vegetable garden. The HOA continued to operate the clubhouse under our easement agreement. The annual payment arrived on time, deposited electronically into my account. The plaque remained on the clubhouse wall, a permanent reminder of what had happened. One Saturday in May, I was working on the deck when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, maybe in their early 30s. The woman was pregnant. "Mr. Feldman," the man called out. "That's me. I am Jason Marsh. This is my wife, Kelly. We just bought the Henderson property." I climbed down from the deck and shook their hands. The Hendersons had decided to sell and move to Arizona to be near their daughter. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "We wanted to introduce ourselves and thank you," Kelly said. "Mrs. Henderson told us the whole story about the HOA and your lawsuit. What you did took guts." "I was just defending my property." "You did more than that," Jason said. "You stood up to the kind of HOA bullying that makes people afraid to buy in these communities. When we were looking at houses, the real estate agent actually told us this was a good HOA because they had been humbled by a lawsuit and cleaned house." Kelly laughed. She said, "They learned their lesson about respecting property rights. That actually made us more interested in buying here." We talked for a while about the area and the community. They seemed like good people, the kind of neighbors I would be happy to have. Before they left, Jason mentioned they were having a barbecue the following weekend and invited me to come. I went to that barbecue and met several other neighbors. Most were part of the HOA, but the atmosphere had changed. George was there, and he explained that the new board had reformed a lot of the rules. They had reduced the fees, scaled back enforcement, and focused on maintaining common areas rather than policing everyone's properties. "We are trying to be the kind of HOA people actually want to join," he said. "Not the kind that forces itself on everyone. That is a good goal. Your grandfather's property is actually a selling point now. People like that there is history here, not just cookie-cutter vacation homes. Over the summer, I became friends with several families in the area. My cabin became a gathering spot for barbecues and fishing trips. The old place, which Patricia had called a blight on the community, turned out to be one of the things people loved most about Whispering Pines. In August, I met a woman named Paula Sanders at a community picnic. She was a wildlife photographer who had recently moved to Montana from Oregon. We started talking about the mountains and ended up spending the whole afternoon together. She came by the cabin a few days later to show me some of her photos, and we started dating. By September, 1 year after the court ruling, my life had completely changed. I had gone from a divorced guy hiding in his grandfather's cabin to someone with a community, friends, and a relationship with an amazing woman. The cabin had been transformed from a rustic escape to a real home. The annual easement payment arrived again in October. $10,000 for the privilege of keeping their clubhouse on my land. I used part of it to install solar panels on the cabin roof, making the place more self-sufficient. One evening in late October, Paula and I were sitting on the deck watching the sunset over the lake. The aspen trees were golden, and the air had that crisp feeling that meant winter was coming. You ever think about how different things would be if Patricia had just left you alone? Paula asked. I considered it. Probably. But I think she did me a favor in a way. How do you figure? She forced me to really look at what I owned and what it meant. This land has been in my family for almost 80 years. My grandfather built this cabin with his own hands. If Patricia had not tried to push me around, I might have just sold it and moved on after the divorce. And now I know what I have. This is not just a cabin, it is a legacy. It is a connection to my family and to this place. I took her hand. Plus, if she had not been such a nightmare, the story would not have made the news and you would not have read about it and decided to check out Whispering Pines. Paula smiled. True. I came here specifically because I read about a community that had learned to value history and diversity over conformity. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the mountains. The following spring, I got a call from Robert with one final piece of news about the case. Patricia Thornton is out of prison, he said. She served her year and got released last week. Okay. She is not coming back to Montana, though. As part of her probation, she is required to stay in California and perform community service. She also has to attend counseling. Good. There is one more thing. She asked her lawyer to pass along a message to you. I was surprised. What kind of message? An apology. She wanted you to know she understands what she did was wrong and she is sorry for trying to force you out of your home. Did her lawyer say anything else? Just that she has a lot of time to think about her choices. Apparently, she is working as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit and living with her sister. After I hung up, I thought about Patricia and her fall from grace. She had gone from HOA president with power over a wealthy community to a convicted felon working a modest job and living under supervision. Part of me felt sorry for her, but mostly, I just felt relieved that chapter was closed. That summer, Paula moved into the cabin with me. We got married in September, 2 years after the court ruling, in a small ceremony by the lake. George and his wife came, along with the Marshes and several other neighbors. Robert and his partner drove up from Missoula. We held the reception at my cabin, with tables set up on the new deck. During the reception, George gave a toast that made everyone laugh. To Derek, who taught us that you should never mess with a man's cabin, especially when your fancy clubhouse is sitting on his land. Later that evening, as Paula and I danced to music playing from a portable speaker, I looked around at the people who had become my friends and family. The cabin that Patricia had called a blight was now the heart of a community. The clubhouse still operated down by the lake, and the HOA still sent me checks every year. But the whole dynamic had changed. They were paying rent to exist on my property, and everyone knew it. The balance of power had shifted permanently. I never forgot the lesson Patricia taught me, even if she had not intended it. Property rights matter. Standing up to bullies matters. And sometimes the thing that seems like your biggest problem turns out to be your greatest opportunity. My grandfather had bought this land in 1947 with money he earned in the copper mines. He had built the cabin with his own hands and lived here for 60 years. He had passed it to me not just as property, but as a trust. A piece of Montana that belonged to our family, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. When Patricia Thornton tried to take that away with her fake violations and threats, she had awakened something in me. She forced me to fight for what was mine, and in fighting, I discovered what really mattered. The cabin still stands on its 20 acres, with the lake beyond and the mountains rising in the distance. The clubhouse still operates on the corner of my property, a daily reminder of what happened when an HOA president overreached, and every time I see that plaque acknowledging the historic Feldman property, I think about my grandfather and smile. He would have loved this story. He would have appreciated the irony of the fancy HOA having to pay rent to the family they tried to push around. Sometimes I drive past the clubhouse and see HOA members using the pool or playing tennis. They are welcome to enjoy those amenities, as long as they remember whose land they are on. The annual easement payment ensures they never forget. Paula and I built a good life in that cabin. We added on a studio for her photography, upgraded the kitchen, and improved the insulation. But we kept the essential character of the place. It is still a log cabin, still rustic, still authentically Montana. The HOA never bothered us again. The new board operated with transparency and restraint, focusing on maintaining common areas and staying out of people's private business. Property values increased anyway, not because of strict enforcement, but because Whispering Pines became known as a community that respected both tradition and property rights. Years later, people still talk about the HOA war and how it changed everything. The story has become local legend, embellished and retold at community gatherings. Some details get exaggerated, but the core truth remains. A bully tried to take what was not hers, and justice prevailed. I kept all the documents from the case in a file cabinet in my office. The threatening letters from Patricia, the court filings, the judge's ruling, and the easement agreement. Someday, when I have kids, I will show them those papers and explain what happened. I will teach them that property rights are not abstract legal concepts but real protections that matter. The cabin represents something important. It stands as proof that you do not have to back down when someone with perceived authority tries to push you around. You do not have to accept injustice just because the bully has a title and an organization behind them. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way. Her attempt to evict me from my cabin led to the discovery that I owned her clubhouse. Her embezzlement came to light because of the audit triggered by our lawsuit. Her reign of terror over the HOA ended because she picked the wrong target. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just paid the fines and tried to comply with her demands. Would she have left me alone? Or would she have kept finding new violations and new reasons to harass me? I suspect the latter. Bullies do not stop when you give in. They escalate. By fighting back, I not only protected myself but probably helped others too. The HOA reform that followed benefited everyone in the community. The exposure of Patricia's theft protected the other homeowners from further financial harm. And the legal precedent established that HOAs cannot simply claim jurisdiction over properties that predate them. The cabin sits peacefully now, smoke rising from the chimney in winter, flowers blooming around the deck in summer. The land that my grandfather claimed in 1947 remains in family hands, protected by the same property rights that have always been the foundation of American ownership. And down by the lake, the clubhouse operates on my land, paying rent every year, a monument to what happens when power meets principle and loses.